Hello and welcome to Milestone Mindset Live. I'm your host, Nancy Sargent, the founder of the Milestone Marketing Blueprint and the CEO of Sargent Marketing. And I'm here with Guy Powell. He is an author, speaker, and global marketing strategist of Pro Relevant. And he has recently written one of a series of books called The Post COVID Marketing Machine. Welcome, Guy. How are you today?
Hi, Nancy. Great to be here. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to set the stage of what we're doing here and what we are going to accomplish for our viewers today. Guy and I are both what I'm going to call system geeks. We like having a marketing system. I haven't explored this with him, but he probably likes things orderly and systems in the rest of his life as well. And we both believe in marketing that can get measured. Uh, it is what has always been my guiding principle with my clients. Anything that we are going to recommend, we're going to let the client know how they can determine if it's working. We always want to know, how do we define success? And in meeting Guy and learning more about him and how he has helped global brands chart their success and use data, I immediately wanted to ask him to be one of my guests to help our audiences prove their marketing and improve their marketing. So, Guy, I would like to give you the opportunity to tell us quickly about your latest book, and then I'm going to give everyone a little rundown of what we're going to accomplish, and we're going to jump right in. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I guess let me get started. My new book, as Nancy mentioned, the Post-COVID Marketing Machine, and Prepare Your Team to Win. And I think that subtitle is pretty critical because the whole idea for marketing is not just to spend money. The idea for marketing is to spend money in the right ways that can be measured so that they drive incremental value, whatever that value is. Now, for most companies, that can be sales, but it could also be market share. It could also be, how do I drive the brand? Or it could be for cause marketing, is how could I get more people to engage with the brand? And so depending upon what your success metric is, the whole idea is to get it so that and help the whole marketing team so that they can win based on what their objectives are. And so I wrote this book. When COVID hit in March 2020, it was kind of a weird sensation. I'm sure you had it as well, Nancy. It's kind of like, well, what do I do now? And normally we would have, been speaking with clients and doing meetings and face-to-face meetings and things like that. And then all of a sudden that went away. And I had immediately said, this is going to be interesting because a couple of weeks from now, 3 weeks was the original amount of
Right.
time. And then it turned into 6 months, and then 12 months and 18 months. And I said, I wanted to write the next book, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I said, aha, I'm going to write on post-COVID, because it's, I can't imagine COVID being around forever. So there had to have been something going on. And I'd already noticed, even with our clients and what they were doing, that there were some major differences that they were seeing in how their customers, their consumers were changing. And I'm sure you saw that as well,
Mhm.
Nancy, where in the post-COVID world, all of a sudden, we weren't going to the store. We couldn't go to the store. And so we were now changing our habits. And many of us had already been buying things on Amazon, but now it was almost 100%. I'm not going to be going to the store, even to buy relatively expensive items, things that I'd want to touch and feel. I'm just going to go to Amazon or somewhere online and buy it that way. And that big change of how we now changed our consumer purchase behavior. So that's the first big element of what I see as what happened and what I started to talk about in my book. And then I also noticed, and all my friends that we were talking to, they said, hey, have you binged this? Have you binged that? And, it was Ted Lasso or whatever the show was on Netflix. And so then all of a sudden our entertainment changed, because we weren't able to watch a football game or a baseball game or a soccer game. All of those things were closed down. And so, so our media consumption behavior changed. And I'll tell some stories maybe as we get a little further, but that was the second big change that I saw, and I said, aha, that I got to definitely get in here into my book. And then the last one was how we respond. And what I noticed was, we'd be binging or something, and or we'd be talking and we'd say, well, let's go look at the website. And whereas before we might not have been so anxious, but because we couldn't get out, we were so used to being right in front of our camera, and in front of our laptops, we then you just go to the website. And so then the consumer media response behavior changed as well. And it's those three dimensions of consumer behavior that changed that is really now what's affecting the post-COVID marketing environment. And then with the corollary is, okay, well, how do I include all of that so that I can build a post-COVID marketing machine? And then that's what my book is about.
And what I like about what you said, especially, is still the consumer first. So what I want to emphasize is, while our behavior changed, and mine certainly did, I bought a car that got delivered to me in the spring of 2020, I guess that was. And so all the timeless things we know about marketing, which includes testing and listening to data, all relevant to consumer behavior, is not new, but we're just seeing how everyone has incorporated this into their lives, as well as with my healthcare clients. For example, telemedicine. Consumers were more adept at wanting to use telemedicine, and then all the healthcare clients, the providers, quickly adapted to it, where there would have taken a lot longer. And there's many other examples. So let's just go over what we're going to accomplish here. The payoff of this is we're going to help you know how to prove and improve your marketing better with things, or at least one thing you can take away and do right away, even this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you are in the world. We are going to be talking about, with a whole premise here is, without data, we're just guessing. But data can be intimidating. And there is a method to the madness. I have a method, you have a method. All I want is our viewers to have a method, whichever one works with them, for them. And then we're going to be talking about aligning data with operations and sales. This is something that marketing automation helps us do, and data helps us do. It's completely important. Otherwise, the marketers, they end up in a silo, and we're not speaking to the data that our internal clients want if we're in-house marketers, or our external clients. And then the whole thing about this is data-driven strategic decision-making. That's what it is. And then we're going to have a payoff of something that you can do today. And that'll be for you, our viewers, to decide. So let's start here. Just a comment from you, please, about proving and improving your marketing. That's really why we're here. What can you share about where to begin with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, and we're going to talk about data. Data is everything, and I will admit, marketers sometimes have trouble figuring out what the right data is. Some companies have too much data, some don't have enough data. And when I was talking about in my book about the three different changes in consumer behavior, there's data available on that. You can actually go out, and if you don't have it yourself, you can go out and research it, and start to really find out how your consumers have changed their viewing behaviors, their purchasing behaviors, and then also what they see in the future. And so there is a lot of data that can be had. Now, without data, everything is anecdotal. And so you could say, well, that ad, I really liked it. I thought it was great. Boy, oh boy, I think marketing is going to do really good this year. And you go, well, how good? And you go, well, I don't know. I think we're going to do good. Well, that's no good. So without data, and I love what you've got here, without data, we're just guessing. And actually our tagline for the company is don't guess, know, act, and win. So don't guess. You have to have the data. And then, okay, so now we have the data. And I think as we get a little further into that, into this conversation, we'll talk about, what kinds of data and whether you're a small company or a big company. But without data, you are definitely guessing. And the problem is, though, you as the senior marketer, or you as even the founder or the owner of the company, have to realize that data is not free. It does cost money. And I always like this thing, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Well, there is no such thing as free data. Data costs money. And if you want to do a good job, you have to pay for data. I kind of liken it to the CFO. If the CFO didn't spend money on collecting data in terms of what's in the bank, how much cash is in the bank, how much foreign exchange they have, and how much inventory they have, all of that is data, and all of that data costs money to collect. It just doesn't come out of the air. Well, the same thing on marketing. You have to realize that you have to have data, and then of course the question is, what data is it? But you have to have data, and it is not free. Yeah.
Let me just jump in here before we scare everyone right away from listening about paying for data. Certainly, there are different levels of payment for data, right? I specialize in nonprofits, small businesses, mid-sized companies. You specialize in global companies. So there's varying amounts of data that you need. And you already pay for something likely to send your emails out on, no matter who you are, what size company. So when we're saying you're on social media, you have analytics. When we're saying you pay for data, you already are paying for data, and as well as you might choose to pay for more data. But we want to encourage you today to use what you have and choose if you need to invest more on where to get that. So it's very important to know that you already have probably information at your fingertips. So in the method to the madness that we're going to get into, the meat and potatoes here, I think it's a good time to define data, and what kinds we're talking about for marketing, and where to get it. And let's just demystify data, because I feel like that 4-letter word, it just looms large and is intimidating. And maybe it used to be intimidating to me, which is why I feel that way, but it is no longer. So let's break down some data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that. One of the things with data is that there is data that is available for small companies to be able to start to track what their activities are. And even for our company, we're a small company. We work for large companies, but to market ourselves, we need to have data to see how we're doing. And Nancy, you mentioned, basically most of the sources. It's what's going on Facebook, what's going on in social and Twitter, and potentially now with TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever it happens to be. There are a couple of things that you can start to track. And then you can, once you start that tracking, then you can start to see what your marketing activities have been able to generate. So one of the big things that I recommend, especially for small business, but the concept is the same even for larger businesses, is that to start to track data on a regular basis. What do you think is success? Well, success could be visits to the website. It could be the level of engagement on your website. It could be the number of likes that I've got. It could be the number of shares that I've got. It could be the number of followers that I have. All of those things are elements of success that marketing generates. Now, the second piece of that, though, is once you start to collect that on a regular basis, and I'm not saying it's easy, but nevertheless, it is doable, and it is more a question of just time as opposed to actually spending money on it. But nevertheless, you can start to collect that data on a regular basis so that when you do some kind of a marketing activity, let's say it's an email, let's say it's a direct mail, let's say you go to a conference, you should be able to see the activity kind of start to peak right around that activity, and then it'll probably fall off a little bit after that. And with that peak, then you can say, well, look at that. Here's what we were able to generate at least at a top level from any of the marketing activities that we just invested in. And so all of that is what you can do, whether you're a small company, and in a similar way for a bigger company, they just pay more money for the data. Right. They're paying third parties to get it, and they're getting a lot more complex data. But for a small business, just that first thing is to just start tracking things on a regular basis. I recommend weekly. How many new followers did we get? How many did we lose? How many email subscribes do we have? How many unsubscribes do we have? Just the simple things, and just start tracking that. But critical is to track it regularly, and I recommend weekly. So you may just want to do it on Monday, every day at Monday at 12 o'clock, or every Tuesday at 12 o'clock, just on a regular basis.
And plot it out or follow it in a long term, just like investing or following your weight. You shouldn't, it's not a point in time. But it's also important because we're going to move into the conversation about aligning marketing data and operations and sales. But what I wanted to say was, when you are looking at what we're talking about, I think, are key performance indicators, right? We can't always say the goal of marketing is only to get X amount of sales. Ultimately, sure, it's either the goal is either lead generation or quicker turnaround cycle to convert them, get the right prospects in your salesperson's hand or your development person's hand, or even if it's all digitally. So these key performance indicators, as you said, we need to know, let's say, what is going on a web page in general when we're doing nothing, because hopefully we have content on there. So give us some sources of data for those that are listening that are a bit larger too. I mean, we've got the organic things we can follow, like you said, socials and emails and things like that. But where are some third-party data sources for anyone that might be wanting to find out consumer behaviors for their specific interest?
Absolutely. So for and depending upon how you want to define a mid-size or a large size, there are a lot of different data sources. So you can get social media from a handful of things. YouGov is a good source that will track then the level of social activity for not only you, but also your competitors. So you can see how you're doing relatively. There's a thing called a Decision Report, which can determine how much PR you get every day, how many articles have been written about you, what your mentions are, and then whether those are positive and negative. So you can start to see what your PR looks like. If you need to get your competitive media data, so if you have a competitor that's advertising in a big way, then there's Kantar. There used to be Nielsen as a source for that kind of data. You can get your own data, of course. That's probably even more important, is what you are paying your agency to actually insert into the marketplace, whether that's paid digital or paid search or paid social or online video or connected TV or then linear TV or radio or billboards, whatever it happens to be. And all of that comes either from yourself as you buy it, if you depending on how big you are, or from a third party agency that might be doing the buying for you. So and that's just a handful of sources. Certainly it gets there's a lot of other really, really cool data out there. One of them is which I really like, is geolocation data. And what geolocation data is, basically tells you how many times a single cell phone crosses the threshold into your store or into your museum or into your venue. And then also not only your store, but your competitor's store. So now you can start to see what your shares are in terms of how many visits you're getting based on your advertising, and also based on the competitive advertising, and then vice versa, how many visits your competitors are getting based on their advertising and based on your advertising. So you can start to do some really, really interesting stuff. And this geolocation data, I think, is just one of the really, really cool data sources.
Yeah, I mean, everything is local, even if you're a global marketer. Let's just talk about what aligning marketing and operations and sales looks like on a high level. And then I really want to spend a couple of minutes in how you make data-driven strategic marketing decisions. So yeah, let's talk about this alignment. It's something I talk about all the time. And I like that you had in your book and your conversation operations as well. You see often aligning marketing and sales, but operations, that's where the fulfillment comes, the customer satisfaction, so many other things. So I'm going to turn that over to you.
Absolutely. And like one of the obvious things is if I do a big activity, and I don't know what that might be, but let's say you do a buy one get one, buy one get one free. If you don't have enough inventory on the shelves when your consumer goes to the store, then your marketing activity was wasted. So we had exactly that problem with a company, with a telecom company over in Holland, and they made exactly that mistake. They did a huge promotion of a new phone. I can't remember which Apple iPhone it was, but it was a new Apple iPhone, and they didn't have enough inventory on the shelf. Well, what that does is people want to buy that new iPhone, but they go to your store and they can't find it, so they go to the competition and buy it there. So you have generated demand for your own self, certainly. But if you don't have enough inventory, then they're going to go over to the competition. We did a project for here in the U.S. for a restaurant chain, and they competed against a big chain. And during the Super Bowl, it was Denny's restaurants they were competing against. During the Super Bowl, Denny's had a Super Bowl commercial. And they said, if you come to us on Tuesday, you will get a free Grand Slam. I don't know if you remember what a Grand Slam is at Denny's, but it's basically 2 eggs, toast, bacon, and coffee. I can't remember. And so anyway, if you come on Tuesday, so this is the Sunday, if you come on Tuesday, you'll get this thing free from the hours of 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. And there were some details. And so I was talking to our client who competed with Denny's. And I said, and I called him up Wednesday, and I said, well, how did it go yesterday? Because I was just curious to see if their stores were empty or not. And he says, oh my God, we had the best day ever. And so what he said, and technically the restaurant is an inventory. What Denny's did was their ad was so successful that they had lines of people out the store. They had maybe 100 to 200 people waiting to get in to get that free breakfast. Well, if I'm on my way from work and I say, man, I want to get a free breakfast at Denny's, and then I see 200 people there, I can't wait 2 hours. So then they just keep on driving. Well, they haven't had breakfast yet, so they went to my client, their competition. And so their sales peaked because Denny's was able to generate so much demand that they didn't have the operational capability to be able to handle that level of demand. And so when you're doing a marketing activity and it could be wildly successful, then you have to realize that somehow your operations have to be ready for it. And that's a big thing. And that happens in so many different cases. And sometimes it's good. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. You can't do a half of a Super Bowl commercial. You got to do a full one. They ended up doing 3 insertions. So they spent about $12 million at the time. And the ad was wildly successful, but it was successful for them as well as the competition, which was, just kind of an interesting little anecdote on how well advertising can do and how it needs to be aligned with your operations.
Along that line, because you mentioned this earlier, when we look at data and we do want to have our finger on the pulse of what our competition is doing, because that does happen. When a category advertises or when it's seasonal, and let's say someone bigger than you does paid advertising, but you're in the space, you can be doing other organic advertising. You can take advantage of that. Usually everyone gets uplifted by a big influx of dollars in advertising. And so that's where the steady drumbeat of marketing and paying attention to what's happening has to be solid for your core situation. So yeah, I love that. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, if I can add one more thing, I think, which is really why I wrote the book, The Post-COVID Marketing Machine, and also its precursor, which was just Marketing Machine, is that if marketing can be depended upon and relied upon for a solid understanding of how much revenue they can generate and how much sales they can generate, then that reflects in terms of operations as well, so that they can make sure they've got inventory on the shelf for when they do some kind of a big activity. And so once you get those two things aligned, it's kind of like an enterprise resource planning system, ERP system. If you get the demand side figured out and you can flow that down through your operations, you can get the inventory figured out, you can get manufacturing figured out, you can get raw materials figured out, and all of that lends itself to not only being able to survive, to satisfy your customer needs, but also to reduce costs because you've got a streamlined flow. And that's why a marketing machine is just so important.
Right. And built into the overall system, as is really what we're saying. So let's talk about this. What kind of strategic decisions? I mean, we just alluded to them in practical, but so we're going to wrap this up in a few minutes, and we're going to get back to that payoff of maybe what you would do today, where you're going to start, and that will definitely depend on where you are in your own organization. But let's talk about a few specific strategic decisions that can be made with data.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's funny. When I was younger in my marketing career, every decision that I made, I said, "Oh, this is a strategic decision. It's a strategic decision." I could be buying, thumbnails or dry erase markers for the whiteboard. Oh man, we got to make a strategic decision here. Well, strategic has gotten so messed up. And I spent a lot of time on that in both of my marketing machine books in terms of trying to define that. The strategic decisions, in my opinion, are really those that are going to affect where you're going to be 3, maybe 5 years out. And so then what I want to be able to do is define that as a strategic decision. Now, and I was guilty of this, when we were coming up with our annual marketing plan, I would call that a strategic plan. It's not a strategic plan. It's an annual marketing plan that has to roll up so that my spending and my expected sales meet what the board or the stockholders want out of me or out of the company. That is the corporate plan. That is not a strategic plan. That is a corporate plan. And then lastly, what are the actual tactics that I'm going to do? So I'm going to do some Facebook. We're going to get into TikTok. I'm going to do something else. Those are just tactics. Those are not strategic. Okay, so maybe somebody could say, well, it's tactical or it's tactigic. You could kind of come up with something in the middle, but those are not strategic. So now when we're going to be making strategic decisions, we're looking for 3 to 5 years out. So we're really trying to understand how our consumers make purchase decisions. And if we understand in detail how they make purchase decisions, and if we understand that that's not going to change unless like it did with COVID, then I can start to figure out, well, where do I want to be in 3 to 5 years? And it's that kind of data, the consumer data, the critical consumer purchase behavior data that will help me to make strategic decisions. Then the second piece of that is what's the competition going to do? Well, it's always interesting. The competition knows more than you'd like them to. They know exactly when you're going to be launching your new product. And they know, and we know when they're going to be launching their new product. So we can kind of make some estimates to say, well, here's what our plans are, but we kind of think that our biggest competitor is going to launch this within the next 12 months, whatever this is. And we then need to understand that data so that we can put it into our strategic plans in terms of how we think that might affect our sales. So those for strategic decision making, based on my definition of strategy, those are the 2 or 3 critical things. There's one that's a little less important. I don't mean it as not being important, but it's a little bit more difficult. Is then what's going to happen to external factors? Is the unemployment rate going to go down, up or down? Is the inflation rate going to go up or going to go down? Is our interest rates going to change? But those can be, they're important, but they're not as important as what your consumer purchase behavior is, and then what your competitive activities are.
3 to 5 years. It's hard for any of us to even imagine that benchmark anymore, because only thing we know now is things change so rapidly. So we can't be afraid of thinking about that and looking at that. And of course, we're going to be following along the interim data and observations and be able to, I don't like the word react, but pivot or adjust. But it is important that someone is looking ahead. It's just like going on a trip. You have to look in the turn, as we've been told. You have to look where you're going, and the car will follow. So what we do, you and I, Guy, and some of our colleagues, I mean, we're here to help companies do that. People are working harder than ever. The whole digital age, the whole thing that makes all this data so available, and we know what our competitors are doing and vice versa, was supposed to give us shorter work days and things like that instead
Yep,
of,
ready for that.
24/7 work days. But um, so sometimes when you're thinking about what your investment is and where you're going to get this data, make sure you have given yourself the time to take a look at it. And even every week, if that's a lot for you, and right now you're not doing it at all, once a month will do. Just never is not okay. And so for stepping into this today, let's say you all already a system geek, like I said we were, or a data obsessed person, which is great. Let's just take a breath and make sure that you are doing something with it. And please don't have these conversations in a vacuum. And please don't have these conversations only with your 3 people or your only one person in your organization. You have to talk to other people, external people, whether you hire someone or you do this in professional groups. You just really need input. And I was just listening to participating in a webinar in Kansas City earlier today virtually. And there was this great point made that when we think we know all the answers is when we actually stop learning. And so data helps us keep learning. Asking other people's input and you having the wisdom to decipher it is important. So I think the parting words on the payoff of what to do for me includes putting on your calendar an hour to look at where your data sources are coming from and what you're doing with them and how is it connected to your bigger organization. If you ask yourself those 3 things this afternoon, tomorrow, or sometime this week, you will be better informed and better prepared to do anything you're doing in marketing later. Guy, what would you say you'd encourage someone to do as a payoff of listening to this today?
Yeah, absolutely, and is to start that measurement and weekly, or I'm not sure I'd go monthly, but weekly is what I would kind of recommend, and the payoff to that will be your career, your company, and of course marketing success, and then your pay. If you are really measuring, you will get paid more. And there was a Booz Allen study maybe 5 years ago that said that those marketers that really work towards a measured, data-driven marketing environment generally get paid 10 to 20% more. That's number one. Number two, if you can put on your resume, I helped generate 500 million or 500,000 in incremental sales, the hiring manager is going to be a lot more interested in that than somebody saying, I spent and never overspent my budget. They don't care about, I mean, yes, they do care about the budget. What they care about is whether you were able to drive sales or drive whatever your cause is or your top line is. I was able to generate an increase the Facebook following by 150% over my first 6 months of the business. That's the top line thing that needs to go on your resume. And those are the payoffs, because that then will work forward just throughout your whole career. And I even tell my the folks that work for me is to make sure that when we get done with whatever it is, that they put that kind of on their resume and say, well, what was the success out of that? Because it will help them. Even working for me or working for anybody, when they can say, yes, we generated this. So one of the things that I had, this woman, she was an intern for me, and I said, she was able to get me in my post-COVID marketing machine. She did the marketing and all the activities to get us #1 international bestseller. It was her activity that did it. And I said, make sure that that goes on your resume as you're going to be, going through life. That will be something that you'll always be able to, to put there. And that to me is the payoff. That to me is definitely the payoff.
Absolutely. And there's a specific industry related question here about real estate, Guy, that you and I will answer online. And if anyone watching has questions, these videos are airing on Guy's socials, my social. Ask us questions, we'll answer them. And Guy and I both wish you best of luck with your marketing. It's not luck. And have a system. Schedule some time to check it and check it twice. And what gets measured matters. That's how we started this conversation, and it is absolutely true. So thanks for listening, and we are going to sign off. So thank you very much, Guy, and I'll see you back in the studio.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome.